Hello, and welcome for joining. Welcome. We're going to splice that one out. Okay. Hello, welcome to Business Performance USA, our weekly webinar series. This is Victor Dominguez speaking. I'm Executive Director of BP USA, and we're really happy to have everyone join us today. Today we're discussing invention, not innovation, but invention, and 5 critical questions to ask and answer. Why and how, when and who, and what's next. So we group those accordingly. You'll see why. And most important today, that this is an interactive conversation, a dialogue, if you will, to take this topic further about how invention adds sustainable value to companies. We're going to move on, and most importantly, I want to introduce you to an esteemed colleague of mine, Dr. Jeff Stewart. Dr. Jeff is co-founder of Business Performance USA. Let me tell you a little about Jeff. It's a fascinating individual, and I've been privileged to work with him for a number of years now. Dr. Jeff has been serving Fortune 10, 100, and 1,000 firms for more than 30 years by focusing on top leaders, on the critical dimensions of core intelligence properties, and on rapid timing market entries for their emerging businesses. Basically, you can take your good ideas, make them better, and make them faster into the marketplace and monetize your strategy. It's what he does exceptionally well, and that's what we'll be talking in part about today. Dr. Jeff's career to date, the economic value he's generated is in the range of 14 figures, very, very significant. Dr. Stewart also serves as Chairman Emeritus of the National Advisory Council of the American Society for Competitiveness. He certainly knows how to compete in the marketplace. And for 50 years, Jeff has been serving as ordained elder. That's 30-plus years elder at large for his faith communities, as well as Loyal Eagle of the Boy Scouts of America. A fascinating individual, and again, we're really happy you joined us today in this conversation as well. Just a quick note, housekeeping here. We do want to make sure this event is worth your time, and we want you to ask questions using the chat feature or the question feature. And if you're watching this on demand, which is becoming increasingly popular at Business Performance USA, you're free to continue to ask us questions. You can email me. I can provide you a phone number. So we want to make this a dialogue with you as well if you're watching on demand. So we are here. We monitor our website all the time, and the conversations that flow on our website. So you're not left out of the loop if you're watching on demand. Of course, you can contact me, Victor, at businessperformanceusa.org. And having said that, let's just jump into Dr. Jeff's brilliant wisdom and ideas here. We really want to set up today the world of continuous change, and people are always looking for something new, bigger, and better. Most things, I mean, if you look at, laundry soap, it's continually new and improved, and of course that's a questionable prospect. But is there really a better way to launder clothes? And that's where invention comes in. We get a little hung up on the innovation, and we largely celebrate innovation here at Business Performance USA. But what about invention? Where does that play in so that you can actually replace even the new and improved, make the new and improved old and outdated in yesterday's news, and what will you replace that with? That's where invention comes in. And if you'll notice, sometimes in the bottom corner we have the asterisk, ask us. Again, we want you to ask us, but given the dynamics of disruptive innovation, what do you need to invent to stay in the game? That's essentially the topic for today. Dr. Jeff, I'll let you jump in.
Well, let me again just encourage you to get into the conversation. Victor spoke about things that shine on, the brilliance, he said, and what I'd like to do is to point out that the shining, in the most constructive sense of the word, comes from all who participate in the conversation. It is something that is about shared resources. And the biggest return on resources that we ever see is when those who are in the sharing mode, that is co-working and collaborating and exchanging ideas freely and pursuing their inquiries with the good intent, of course, but always looking for what really matters next and making the most of that. That's the model that we endorse, and it's less onerous and certainly much more efficient than people believe. Invention is the driver for economic value creation. It's not that going to market is unimportant or that innovation, that vector, is not doing its good. It certainly is. It's all about, distribution and folks being able to get what they want when they need it, or get done what they want to get done when it's timely, or understand what they need to understand when they are basically faced with a crunch. Google and Apple and all of the companies that are out there today are well aware of that part. And a few of those in the heartbeat of similar companies, many who don't have the brand presence in the market that Apple or Google might, also understand that invention is what drives it. And there is a difference between intending something by design, that's that little blue ball with the D's, and discovering something that needs to be replaced, that's the red ball with the DN. That difference is provides you the constraints on invention. And constraints are important. If you don't know your limits, you don't even know what to exceed. It would be akin to saying, I don't know where I am, I think I know where I want to go, so by gosh, I'm going to get there. Well, how are you going to know the course you're going to take? Dead reckoning? I can't tell you how many people who reckon that way are found dead and unfortunately macerated by time. So I would like to suggest that we move into a discussion of why invention is critical, and maybe you could sort of key it off there, Victor, or anybody else online.
Well, Dr. Jeff, I'll jump in, and going at the beginning of this slide, you talked about sharing, and I think of two ways. I infer that you're talking about sharing within the organization or within the company, sharing new ideas, methods, processes, and having a way to vet those and qualify them. And then, of course, sharing those ideas with the marketplace. Is that a reasonable
Yeah,
assumption?
exactly. That's a reasonable assumption, but I also would like to point out, in this particular slide, we've taken our initiative to color the overlaps of these balls green. There are a variety of reasons for doing that. Green's a popular color these days, but it's nothing very mysterious. First of all, the greenbacks come when the invention is driving the organization, and they come in two forms: going to market and getting the transactions moving, and innovating and improving and building the trust in the marketplace. Second thing to note is that it's green because it's sustainable. And, people sometimes like to avoid that word because of policy, but in my experience, those who lead the change for a more sustainable business model and also have a certain degree of corporate social responsibility commensurate with their success are those who end up surviving when all the competitors sort of tire out and fall away. And those surviving companies are the ones that lead the way into the future. They also tend to be the ones who best understand the nature and the practice of invention.
Okay, excellent. And our question for our audience is really, how long will you be competitive in the marketplace without invention, the mindset of what it takes to get there, monetize it, and stay adaptive in the marketplace. The example we use is if you're making cameras, what are you doing to invent a new product given that smartphones are taking away a significant share of your marketplace?
Yeah,
So
well, go ahead.
we'll keep moving on in the interest of pace, but we're just kind of teasing people with questions here.
Yeah, let's see what we have for questions.
We do have one question from our audience. Quote, doesn't this require leaders who value invention? So this individual is taking it back to leadership.
Absolutely, and what I'm trying to get across is that the ability to value invention is the ability to expect a high return on invention. If all you value is innovation, that is piece part improvements, then you might stumble across something inventive and find a way to use it. It's kind of like the old 3M model, you know, that used to celebrate its playfulness and its inefficiencies in groups, and occasionally they would invent Post-it notes or something like that. And they could justify that because of the high volume of transaction that would result and the stable and simple productivity that would go with it. On the other hand, when you deal with things more complicated than the processes that produce Post-it notes, like cell phones, it's a little bit more challenging, let's say, to really value the inventors or the inventors, if we're to say it correctly, and the invention as a vector in business itself. I mean, when all that cash starts coming in at very sizable buy-in, what are you going to do with it? You know, most people just throw more cash at it, right? So are you really gaining efficiencies in your own operation and improving your effectiveness for your customers? Are you really being strategic in how you conduct your business? Or are you getting lost in the weeds and simply, you know, focusing on cutting the grass every day? The grass doesn't need to be cut every day, folks. You know, it needs to be cut on some pattern commensurate with your community's expectations. And that's where corporate social responsibility comes in. When you are part of a community of economic value, there are certain standards of excellence that you want to abide by and certain criteria appropriate to your own neighborhood within that community that you want to refine and continue to lead the way with.
So Dr. Jeff, clearly, I'm going to loop back for a second to the question, because you've taken this common sense but critical question and moved it into the slide, and I appreciate that. Let me just wrap it up. The reason I like the question, doesn't this require leaders who value invention? The question is, yes, it does, and leaders need to value new ideas and new way of thinking, a process that I call ideation. And sometimes a new idea is a threat in an organization. And to your number one question here, that's a vector for cultural excellence, the ability to listen to new ideas, to vet them logically and rationally, because you'll probably surface more ideas than you can bring to market, and than you want to bring to market. So that's a vector point for leadership and cultural excellence.
Well, we're going to get into that when we start talking about who and when, but let me just address that very quickly. Surfacing more ideas than you need when you're going into market. I mean, let me give you an example. If you're hunting for something and you want to find it, one of the oldest strategies is to get a bunch of folks together and sort of organize them across the field of action and have them make a lot of noise and sort of chase out the baddies and chase in the things that you're after, right? You close in on what you look, and finally you find it, you take a shot at it, and if you're, you know, excuse my metaphor here, I'm a great animal rights champion in many ways, but, you know, I'm also a champion of the hunting instinct in the human being. If you're the great hunter, then you hit it on target and you get your trophy and off you go. But that's the end of the hunt, right? It's also the single most inefficient way of caring for the process of discovery and replacement. Because in the end, if you hunt out the last whatever and there are none left, there's not going to be any more hunts. So, you know, we see that in America with the American bison, and sometimes called the buffalo. They're actually two different species, but nonetheless, the American bison was pretty much hunted down because people believed there could be no end to the providential opportunity and abundance of that, quote, new world called America. Now, if you think about that for just a minute, you realize we're having to struggle every day to repopulate our planet with species that have maintained the order of being on this planet for millennia before we came along and started treating it like, you know, it was basically just another rock to smash in order to make concrete. And it takes, in other words, a little more opportunity and understanding of how to conduct the hunt in order to be efficient and effective. And those savvy things are what we call business strategies. And those strategies, of course, have to reflect the dependence that we have on our environment, which is a good dependence. It allows us substantial independence under the laws of nature, and in some people's philosophical lights, under natural law. In any case, what we're talking about is how we organize our activities, and the other word for that, of course, is culture. So culture ends up trumping strategy, and in effect echoing the leadership. To come back to the question, doesn't it take leaders who value invention? Absolutely, because if leaders don't value it, they won't be able to find a significant return on invention.
Very nice. Excellent. I'm going to move on to this next slide, Dr. Jeff.
Yeah, it actually picks up on the question of how do you get real competitive with invention and do it through, quote, normal business channels. And the real question is, what is normal? You know, you hear a popular phrase when you go around the world these days, well, that's the new normal. That's the new normal. But that's normal. What is normal? Normal is a statistical term, right? It says that given a certain number of occurrences, there will be a norm. But what does that norm mean? It means focusing on the results you want and building something that you can trust off those results. The reason we track and get all that data and distribute it in a graph so that we can see what we call a standardized bell curve, which is the red curve there. Actually, these are all bell curves. The reason we do that is because we know that overall there are what we call central tendencies, and those central tendencies help us establish norms. So here on this particular graph, we see different ways of focusing on results. And the ways in which we focus are crucial to understanding the expectations about our economics. Economy basically means the principles by which we rule our home turf. And our expectations are the first principles we always put out there. Call it idealism or call it pragmatism, they're still first principles. And what we come to trust is based upon our use and application of first principles and understanding at a second order level of how we're going to pull together our resources and come up with something new that we can create new standards for our community from. So basically in this model what we see is the triangle that we showed before inside a standard normed bell curve distribution. Now, I'm not going to go into all of this, but I'm going to suggest that the more you pull in the corners of that triangle, the higher that distribution goes, okay? And the higher the distribution goes, the more focus you have on a specific set of results. Why?
So when you, Dr. Jeff, when you say pull in the corners, are you compressing time when you do that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's an excellent question. So why don't we move to the questions that are over on the next side, and so we don't get lost in a statistical graph. You know, when you compress time, you have to realize that all you're doing is changing the distance between point A and point B. Now, there may be many zigzags along the course between point A and point B, and there may not be. In an ideal world, the difference between point A and B is what we call a straight line. Or is that ideal? I'm not sure it is. I think it is an abstraction from reality that teaches us that between point A and point B, something moves. And once we understand that, we can look at many moves within a process and shorten those moves until we actually shorten the time frame, which is a third-party external measure of what we're doing. Now, that was a really complicated bunch of words. So let me come back to intellectual property and intellectual property rights. That's IP/R in this question. We have laws in this country which actually date way back into the English common law tradition that respect people's ideas and the way we bring them to action. That really became quintessential once the Renaissance took off and people learned how to read and print and distribute their own ideas very quickly. To make the long story short, as ideas became important because of their material consequences and the shift in lifestyles, we began to want to protect those ideas because they had a lifespan of their own before somebody else's idea could replace it, right? So shortening the distance between your intention and the ideas became the competitive move. And it took a long time for people who wanted to play that out for as much as possible, as long as possible, to realize that it was quicker, faster, cheaper, and inevitably better if they just played along with shortening the distance between the intention to design a better future and develop the process further and faster, and the discovery of the needs and replacement of the things that were already there was something that could make a big difference. And so the distance between design and development on the one hand and discovery and replacement on the other, what we technically in legal terms call novation, has to be squeezed down. And in doing that, you, if you'll flip back a minute to that model yeah, there you go. And when you squeeze down the two corners of the red triangle, or the distribution, the tails of the distribution rises because you still have a whole lot of occurrences going on, and now people are getting focused and they're getting aligned and they're looking at the same kind of future. And the more that happens, the more powerful the impulse is to practice in ways that are very similar. Now, is that bad? No. Is it good? Not necessarily. Sometimes in the world of invention, we talk about those people who keep their word and those people who don't. And that's very important because when you're striving for excellence and creating value, the people who don't keep their word are what we call untrustworthy, and the people who do are the ones we call worth trusting. So it's the results themselves, the behaviors, the outcomes, and the alignments, and the foci that actually pull us in the direction of a better world. And there are rules for that kind of excellence. And that's really something that people don't pay attention to. If you're going out and raising money from a venture capitalist, yeah, you have to follow the rules or you don't get it.
Right. So essentially, in terms of the value creation model and trust, and I'll throw in insight, you need to really fully comprehend what value you can deliver to the customer, and then what value in fact have delivered to the customer. So going from strategy or design development, and then moving that new product, that invention out into the marketplace, making sure it's aligned with your initial intent, and being honest about it. So you're not selling weight loss pills, you know, or that really aren't going to provide value. You're not doing what you're saying you're going to do. So is that?
Yeah, let me give you an example. You know, there was a report out on the web here just in the last few weeks about a study that was done on nutritional supplements and nutraceuticals and things of that sort that were available through mass discount operations. And the study was very clear. What they did is they looked at the components that were inside the caps or inside the compounds that were being sold through the massive discount shops, and they discovered that the likelihood that you were actually getting what you were after at the right level of intensity was way low, maybe 30 to 40% on average. Oh my gosh, people have forgotten that the reason you use these nutraceuticals is because when you use them regularly in a pattern over a long period of time, what it does is it eventually slowly, according to a more organic uptake model, change the way you respond to your environment. And it's not as intense and invasive and as how shall I say it, interventive as standard pharmas. So
that wouldn't
the other reason is that the intellectual property around the standard pharmas is very well defined. You can claim it and you can make a lot of money off of it, right? And so you've got a model around that that's 100 years old or more, and that model is now being driven like crazy at high levels of capitalization. And it's hard to break people away from those vested interests to look at the alternatives which were already there. On the other hand, we know that not everything requires intervention. So, for example, if my neighbors are fighting over a boundary and they can look each other square in the eye and say, you know, I'm getting a little bit testy about this. Let's take a break and come back at it tomorrow. And so they come back tomorrow and they look at it and say, you know, I thought about it overnight, right? And they arrive at a resolution and they move on and they deal with their boundary issues. Well, that's sort of what's going on in the world of alternatives. Taking a break, following a more natural course or a more human course in this case. Human nature is also part of the wider nature. And learning to excel at the right pace. So just because you're going faster or can compress time faster doesn't necessarily make it a wiser choice. So in the rules of the road area of this, what we want to do is understand that it's cycles of learning in the marketplace that create leadership for go-to-market. It's, you know, it's life cycles in the world of improvement that create real value on an extensible basis across the enterprise we call culture in the greatest sense of the word. And it's the shortness of expectation in and around the replaceable value of something that can either be for the good, in fact for the best, or be for the bad, or indeed the worst. And sorting that out is very, very difficult. So it ends up being what we sometimes call a business ethics requirement. Well, the problem with business ethics, as you know, is that every species has its own ethology. And the human species has many ethologies because one thing that makes us inventive is our ability to solve problems adaptively. And that is a second-order phenomenon. We are the adaptive species to start with. When we fail to adapt, we die. So if we adapt and adapt at a level where we're defining and solving problems, we're very, very likely not only to survive, but to thrive. So what are the rules? That's really this fourth question. when is the issue. Who and when. You see, who and when are involved in talking about the route to protecting opportunities, but what is the deal about getting into it and driving it faster? Well, who does that? When are you going to do that? It's all, in the end, about understanding not just time compression in the classic sense of speed, but the ability to control the vehicle that you're in like a race car driver when you're going fast, or the ability to time your place in the race so that you're not just racing for the revenue, but you're in fact pacing yourself for profitability. You wouldn't want to crash into somebody right before the finish line, disturb the whole race, and have more costs than anybody's purse would ever make up, right? So these are questions that become ethical, and they also, of course, have certain moral dimensions, and that's a whole other topic, except for one aspect in business, and that has to do with a concept called bootstrapping. Victor?
Okay, so let's grab onto that ethics chain and loop back, if I may. We have an interesting question here, but let me just set it up in terms of the nutritionals you talked about. That can be a short-term play, but not a sustainable play. You're offering a product into the marketplace that's really isn't going to accomplish what people anticipate, and sooner or later, the marketplace will figure that out, one would think. Of course, there are exceptions, but this gets into the question, which I think is wonderful and brilliant, and the question reads, quote, but most companies are still driven by shareholder profit and Wall Street. So how do large corporations handle invention versus profit? Invention seems like a long-term play if you're going for, and I'm throwing in, if you're going for the sustainable economic value.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Victor. Someday I hope to meet the person that raised it. You know, it really strikes at the heart of the way we approach our social responsibilities and our economic responsibilities when we get together in communities of vested interest. And I use those terms advisedly. For, you know, shareholders, investors, stakeholders in general, employees, unions, policymakers, politicians, they're all communities of vested interest. So I think the important thing to realize is that none of them have a shot at living past the lifetime of their generation, whatever that means in terms of bracketing a generation, unless they understand some basic facts about how you get along and how you serve and how you grow. So getting along with each other is crucial. If all you do is use hyped opinion to drive a wedge between otherwise amicable parties in order to generate a win, then you've basically fallen prey to the same trap of what people sometimes refer to as the gangsters and the banksters, you know? So what you really need to do is say, where is the decision making here? Are you really finding real decisions? Is the authority positional, or is the authority based in wisdom and the experience of real people living real lives, generating real products and offering real services and getting real results and building trust that lasts, you know? Without venturing into the world of political debate, what I will say is that excellence will always escape the people who exacerbate differences. What you will end up doing at your best will be satisficing, that is, giving the least to the most number of people without giving any room for growth or for improving that least and making it better. You'll have the words, you'll make the promises, but you won't practice what it takes to get there.
Yes, but sometimes giving the least to the most number of people, Dr. Jeff, it goes back to the concept of disruptive technologies. And disruptive technologies aren't necessarily the best,
Right.
but they're the most scalable. And so that goes back to your decision making, I suppose. Who's making these
Right.
decisions?
Who's making the decisions, and what scale are you using to measure the results?
Right.
Scalable is one thing, just like a high mountain can be scalable. But is it advisable that people unprepared to or unplanned for attempt to make that summit?
Right.
So, those are the real issues involved, and those are the issues involved in bootstrapping. If you have a viable business model for high technology or consumer electronics or something like that, and it's typically called high performance business model, how do you wed that to invention in such a way that it respects the economic value creation that we all have to share? How do you do that? Well, the model that survives is a bootstrapping model. It is, in fact, the only model we know of that can predictively improve the performance of upstart businesses, sometimes just called startups, or entrepreneurs in general. And some people mistake bootstrapping to say, well, I've got to do it with my own money no matter what, and I can't owe anybody anything. Well, now that's kind of selfish. Think about it. If you're doing it all with your own and paying everybody and owing everybody nothing, then what that means is you have all the money and nobody else has any. Now, how are they going to buy what you're putting out there? Well, then you're going to start charging them to use your money to buy your stuff and give you your money back. Excuse me, where are you going to get more money to offset that? So it turns out there's what we call a single source payer or a single source supplier of cash. And in that case, you're basically locked into a simplified pre-industrial distribution model and trying to make it fit a world that is post-industrial and is indeed based upon currencies in the form of information as well as in the form of intelligence as well as in the form of meaning. Meaningful life is the bottom line, and bootstrapping is the way you get there.
Okay, so let me see if I can sum up this slide, because this goes into a second question that was asked. It's the dichotomy that large corporations are driven by short-term profit and quarterly results, being that they're public. That makes them seem to want to make short-term decisions in use of their resources. But then again, private firms can afford to take a longer approach to a sustainable business model, but private smaller firms don't necessarily have the money to invent. So big corporations can invent but may not want to because of short-term profits and they don't have the time. Large companies may want to have the ideas, but they don't have the resources to play it out.
Yeah, I get the question. This is actually, now please don't take me wrong, but I'm going to tell you that this is not a real paradox. This is a paradox of abstraction. It's what happens when somebody says to you, have you stopped beating your wife yet? You know, you're implicated in something that may not even be going on. So the first assumption is that large corporations are driven by short-term profits. Well, not all large corporations are, as a matter of fact. And the number who are is even within the Fortune 10, quarter over quarter will be less than 1 or 2 because they're competing for the top slot. and that top slot is driven by what? Short-term revenues. But when they achieve that slot and there's nobody else to compete against, what do? They try to extend their life cycles, which means they slow down and they draw it out and they play it longer term. So just conceptually and strategically, we have to admit that the description involved in that question gives us a paradox of abstraction, something that traps us between a rock and a hard place and makes it conceptually difficult to break through to a real solution. So now what are the elements that make that happen? That would take a much longer discussion and much more analysis, but I can tell you that the analytics have been long since solved. The question is whether people are willing to use those analytics in the course of their daily affairs and to rely upon what we would more properly call second-order thinking or true science, that is, science that seeks the truth of the moment as well as the truth of the matter and combines the two to make significant differences not only in how we understand but in how we practice our understanding in communities of vested interest. That's
Well,
pretty
we'll have
big
to leave
words.
that. We'll have to park that for the next discussion, but we'll need to move on, Dr. Jepp. And
Sure.
We've got number 5 here.
Yeah, the big one. What common elements must come together to lay a rock-solid foundation for entrepreneurial inventors? You know, this is kind of a bait question. The issue really is tied up in the question that you raised before. Underlying that question is this: are entrepreneurs able to hear, respect, and grow with the efficiently and effectively with the requirements of those who invent what it takes to create solid, sustainable, breakthrough futures? You know, there are very few inventors who are at heart entrepreneurial. And the reason is that to be a successful entrepreneur, you really have to understand that it's not just what's in your pocket that makes a difference. It's what's in the pockets of others who play into your market space that makes the difference. You know, you can still own absolute control of your firm at 81% under federal law and, by the way, be a public company. Private holdings in public companies can be rather substantial as long as it's distributed across a community of vested interests. So is that entrepreneurial? Is that family-owned? Yeah, it is. And it is also using monies that are invested in the public markets as well as private monies. The simple dissolution of that understanding by people who find it not worthy of a soundbite has caused us innumerable opportunities for nothing but grief in the current marketplace. So why would we want to see the good things we've created pass away when those good things can be improved and thrive and carry forward generation to generation in a marketplace? And I don't mean just marketplace generations. I mean real social generations and economic generations, which by and large are more extensive and have a broader reach than either social or market generations. So my answer to that is get rock solid. What does that mean? That means build a foundation that you can count on, that you can trust, and build it among people of like mind, of common spirit, of solid heart, who take it seriously and have fun at the same time when they work their cardiovascular systems in the morning or in the evening, whenever that is, and when they come to work as well. You know, if you do work out, or if you do run, or if you do heavy physical anything, what's going to happen is you're going to turn around and you're going to be lifting bigger ideas and simpler formats for those ideas and improved views of the world for those ideas in ways that no one else has imagined before. So I want to address this issue. Are inventions just fig Newtons of the imagination? You know, are they things that are going to, you know, cause us to lose control and embarrass ourselves in public? No. Inventions have been cast that way by people who fear disruption that is not constructive. So learning how to be a constructive disruption is part of the maturation process of people and among organizations. Here's the example we've used once before, Victor, in talking amongst ourselves. I said, you know, the class clown is disruptive, but that when nobody's laughing, he's not being very constructive. Now, why would it be constructive when people are laughing? Because if the teacher knows how to work with that, laughter is the hardwired key to putting an experience into long-term memory. It's part of the human species. It's part of our neurology. It's one of the reasons why laughter helps us heal when we have a clear idea as to where we want to be when the healing is done. So I'll just leave that there and say a rock-solid foundation means being a person whose word can be counted on, and when they give that word, they mean it. And that meaning is created by an act of the imagination, by inventing something, by shortening the distance between what one intends to develop and when one intends to implement it. That is, discovering what can be replaced and putting something better in place to drive real innovation along with the go-to-market positioning of a business.
Okay,
sort of got carried away there.
So to sum this up and wrap this up, the common elements would include, it really isn't in one of your earlier slides, cultural excellence, meaning a company that has insight, that can communicate well, that can problem solve, that can do what they say what they do, the ethical and personal interactions. Obviously, the proper resources, proper insight on timing. What other checkboxes are there on these elements?
Well, you know, there's a common saying out there, when something breakthrough hits the market, at least it was common for the generation of my parents, it probably still is in the mindset even of the Gen Zs. What'll they think of next, right?
Right.
What'll they think of next? Well, when you're rock solid, what's next is not just a thought. It goes to action quickly. And it goes to action quickly with a clean intent and a common purpose. So that's my way of coming back to this. When you ask in business, what do we do next? Be sure you're on solid ground, that your feet are firmly planted, that you are doing your push-ups every day. And when you get out there, be open. Open many doors and be open to what the people who want something are telling you that they want. You know, there are people who build breakthrough businesses with huge economic value based upon extreme controls and paranoia. Some people have said, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean it's not true. That's a quote from Andy Grove, I believe, at Intel many, many years ago. And there is a certain truth to that. Constructive paranoia is just sort of like saying, you know, I'm wary, I'm careful, I'm cautious. I've got my eyes open and my ears peeled to hear what the client and the customer really want. Well, if you look past the cultural gossip associated with Apple, what you'll discover is that the insight into what people really want is rooted in at least 5 decades of expectation and search for what we now call the iPhone. It's not just the nugget of imagination from one individual or even a small group.
Okay, I appreciate that, Dr. Jeff. So we're going to be wrapping this up, and thank you very much for all your questions from the audience. And Jeff, thank you so much as well. Again, these are weighty topics and conceptual in nature. What we really do here at Business Performance USA is try and take these concepts and begin a dialogue with our members so that we can extrapolate Jeff's good ideas into the reality of your business and organization, meaning talk to us about how you can bring invention into your organization. What are the critical components you're going to require, and let's brainstorm on it. We like to take theory to practical execution here, and the best way to do that is just to engage us. So you can call Dr. Jeff directly at the phone number listed. Of course, you can email Dr. Jeff and myself at businessperformanceusa.org, and let's start a dialogue. Obviously, you can go straight to Dr. Jeff, but I'm sort of a clearinghouse here, and you can ask really any question about improving your organization and growing and creating prosperity for your entire stakeholder model. And in closing out, we want to let you know that next week we've got a webinar with Kent Stroman. Kent's a brilliant individual that helps nonprofit and profit organizations as well, but he really exists solidly in the fundraising for the nonprofit world, building boards and working on strategic plans. Kent's webinar next week is 5 tips to jumpstart your strategic plan, and we welcome you to join us. You can register for that by going to businessperformanceusa.org, going to the webinars link, and you'll see a description there and a link to click on to register. So we look forward to your attendance there. And as always, we're here at Business Performance with our executive volunteers, ranging in broad topics from strategy, innovation, to social media. Ken Lewis is handling that for us. So marketing, strategy, go-to-markets, you name it, we've got your processes for you. And with that, Dr. Jeff, I thank you. And I thank our audience today. Take care. Have a good day.
Thank you, too.
Appreciate it.